Hey there, my name is Prakash, and I am one of the co-founders and the head of product of Xano. On the line with me is Mr. Sean Montgomery. He is our CEO, and he's also going to be running through this new series that we've put together. We're calling this the Minimum Viable Backend. We've heard from a lot of our customers that they don't necessarily know how to get started. So we thought we would put together a couple of quick tutorials on how to build very popular types of applications. For this one specifically, we're going to start by talking about the two-sided marketplace. And so we'll cover how it's built, how to get things set up, and how to get going. Before that, if you are joining us for the first time and you have no idea what Xano is, Xano basically is the fastest way to build a no limits backend for your application. So if you're a beginner, we have the front end. That's what the user interacts with. And then on the back end, we have things like the database and the API and all of the business logic and a scalable server. Xano provides all of this. So if you don't know Xano and you're building your next application, definitely check it out. So let's go ahead and get started. First of all, what is a two-sided marketplace? And I took this image off the internet that basically describes it pretty well. There's basically two sides when you think about a two-sided marketplace. And you can think of apps like Uber or something like eBay. There's a demand side, right? These are, in the Uber's case, customers that are needing rides. And then you have supply side. And the supply side is things like drivers. And so when you're building this type of application, you need to kind of think about structuring things in a way that's going to accommodate the relationship between both of those sides. So some examples of two-sided marketplaces, popular ones at least, there's Airbnb, Uber, Wag, which is like dog walking for Uber, eBay, Etsy, etc. So if you're starting to think about building a two-sided marketplace, this formula has already been created, and you can leverage a lot of what we're going to show you today to build your own. So some things that we're going to cover today, we're going to cover some basic database schema and setup. So we're going to talk about how you set up the demand side, right? Those customers that are needing that ride. And then we're going to talk about the supply side. And we're actually going to do an Uber type example today. So we'll also be covering tracking that demand side or that driver's location, and then basic reservation. How do you link the two relationships together? Things that we're not going to get to today, but that are pretty important, are any third-party integrations. So think about how you pay your drivers or you take payments. That's typically done in Stripe. Messaging, how you communicate with your customers, and that's done typically through something like SendGrid or Twilio. Recaptcha for security, and then finally chat or real-time location, which is handled via Ably or WebSocket technology. So for these things, you can always message us in support, and we can help you kind of step by step. We also offer office hours and orientation to go through these more complicated dynamics, but still getting started with the basics is going to help you get a good head start on how to build a two-sided marketplace for yourself. So with all of that said, I'm going to hand it over to our CEO, Sean, to take it away and to start building this. And I will comment if he misses anything to get started. All right. So Sean, go ahead.
Awesome. Let's do this. All right, I'm going to share my screen. Okay. So first we're going to create our project. So I'm just calling this marketplace. Inside the marketplace, so I'm going to have both the drivers and the customers have those be the same objects. So they'll both be referenced under user. We then have trip. So trips are just instances of the actual rides. We also have, let's say, vehicle. And then potentially transaction. So I think this is a good start. So let's go ahead. And so now that we've got this database set up, let's make the distinction between customer and driver. So here, we can probably just have a list of roles. So here we'll do a list. So we'll say roles, and then this could be driver. So it could also be administrator. Okay, So let's have two users. We'll start out with Sean, and we'll do Prakash. I'll go in here and make it so that Sean is a driver and Prakash will just be a customer. So the absence of a role means that you're a customer. Okay, so the next thing is vehicle. All right, so let's say we have a title, we have a license, and then we have a reference to the user, which should be a driver. So here we can say we've got a Mazda. Oops. Well, let's say Mazda 3. The license plate is, just making something up, WRX123. And this will be linked to Sean, who is the driver. Okay, so then the next thing, we also need, I forgot, we need a location, which is just latitude, longitude. Okay, awesome. So we could just say, there we go. Okay, so then I just realized we also want a location on the user. So technically, there's a chance maybe we, so location on the user seems like that makes sense for the customer. However, for the driver, it probably makes sense to keep that on the car. So there may be some redundancy here, but we'll come back to that.
And that's because as the customer, the driver needs to know where I am, right?
Yeah.
And then the driver, this is the you want to keep it over on the vehicle because that's where the vehicle is at the time, and you're going to do the mapping that way. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Okay, so then the next thing is what indicates a trip. So the first would be customer. Let's rename that so it's super clear. And then also with a vehicle. And then we automatically get the driver through the vehicle. So then we could have a state and, oops, there we go. So we, let's say started.
And as Sean is building this out, typically whenever you have a relationship between two different user types, you have some sort of ledger. And what this trip database table really is just a ledger that keeps track of the relationship between one user, in this case, the customer, and then the other, which is the driver. So that is kind of why Sean has this separate table fleshed out to do this.
Yes, so we also want to know where, so we have a start. We also want to have a stop. Okay. So we've got the users, we've got the vehicles, we've got the trips. Transaction probably seems like it links to the trip. Let's just add this. So maybe we say that this is a price. And then we have a trip. Okay. All right, so I think this is enough so we can start fleshing out the API. So let's go to the API. We'll do a brand new group. So we'll say marketplace. Okay, so the first endpoint is probably what cars are near me. So what cars are near me, or what vehicles?
And just again, as Sean is fleshing this out, just keep in mind, this is an API endpoint that would be called from your front end. So imagine that a user is looking at their app and they're looking at a map or a list of drivers that are near their specific location. So this is the API endpoint that Sean is fleshing out right now.
So we have vehicle location, and then we want to use some of the geo features here. So within, in meters, so let's do 1,000 meters. Actually, we probably want a couple miles. So let me do a quick calculation here. So 5 miles in meters. There you go. Seems reasonable. And then it is equal to true.
Okay, and just before you move forward, Sean, let me just kind of summarize what happened. So Sean added an input, and that is what value is being passed from the front end. So this input can be something in meters, right? And then he added the first function in the function stack. This is kind of where all the power of Xano lives, and that is to query all records from the vehicle table. And he made a logical filter within that query, the database query, that says, hey, make sure that it's within 5 miles. Whatever the user inputs, make sure that it's within 5 miles of that location. So that's kind of like high level explanation of what he did, and now he'll move forward from there.
Yeah, so I just went and copied. So I randomly picked a spot somewhere in Los Angeles. That's where the car is. I then went and copied that. So technically, I'm doing the exact same latitude, longitude, which means it'd be a 0 distance. So this should return 1 car. Perfect. Okay, so then we can then tweak this. So if we change one of the digits to the left of the decimal, that's probably a very large distance. So this probably does not return anything. Perfect. Okay. But if you just do a couple
and for people, like, I think you can get the latitude and longitude by going to Google Maps, right? If you went to, for example, like Arizona, and you pick a point, it would show you the latitude and longitude that you could then enter here to test yourself.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so here now we have cars near me. However, we probably now want to know whether or not, what is their state? So we want, or actually we want available, busy. I guess they're just 2 states, available or busy.
Yeah, that sounds good.
And we'll default to busy. Okay.
Now, Sean, just a quick question. Why on the user table did you do a list of enums, and on this one, you did just a single enum?
On the user table, I wanted to have it so that you could do multiple roles. So potentially you could be a driver, but also administrator.
Ah, I see.
Technically, that's me. It just allows you to have, and as you add more roles, it's just nice knowing that you can just keep adding more and more, regardless of how many there are.
Okay, that's helpful.
Okay, so now we want what vehicles are near me, but also available. So state is equal to available. Okay, so that should still return something. Perfect. All right. So then the next thing is to book. It sounds like what we want. Okay, so now we have book vehicle. Set that to authenticated. So we want the vehicle. All right, so now we're going to get the vehicle based on the ID. And then we want to do a precondition, make sure it is present.
So a precondition, for those of you that don't know, is basically a function that evaluates a statement and returns true or false. So when you basically see errors that return to you on the front end, it's typically being triggered by a precondition that's basically evaluating something and then returning an error message. So that is exactly what Sean's doing right now.
Okay, so this is saying I want to make sure that we have a vehicle and it is available. So let's do my auth token. I am doing vehicle 1. Okay, awesome. And then vehicle 2 doesn't exist. Should throw an error. Perfect. Okay, and then so let's go back to 1.
And one more thing here before, or yeah, so one thing you'll notice about that API endpoint is he made it authenticated. So this basically means that a user has to be logged in order to execute this. Now, Xano makes it easy. You'll see on the right-hand side where you can automatically authenticate with a user in your system by in the run and debugger. So that's what Sean is doing here. But otherwise, if you were doing this in your app, the user would have to log in, put in their password in order for them to execute this. Final question kind of regarding this, Sean, in function stack item number 2, you do vehicle 1 does not equal null. Can you just talk at a high level about why you're evaluating this null statement?
Yeah, so sometimes people can enter in an ID accidentally, or maybe even the application has a bug in it and it's referencing the wrong ID. So that would mean it returns, it may be referencing a vehicle that doesn't exist. So this is just making sure that this ID should turn into a vehicle that actually exists in the system.
Got it.
Otherwise,
And
we may, like down the line, maybe on like step 4 or 5, we could get a weird error because we're trying to reference like vehicle.id, and that doesn't exist because vehicle is null.
right. And another piece of this is on the precondition, it said precondition failed, but you could have also put in a custom message, right? If you wanted to.
Yeah, absolutely. So we could say this vehicle does not exist.
Perfect.
And we'll do 10. There you go.
Yep. So that is the error, for example, that you would pass to your users on the front end. You might say, you really would say anything that you want there, but this allows you the flexibility again to evaluate a statement and then pass back an error.
Yeah, so now I'll make the vehicle busy. And bring back to 1. So now it should say this vehicle is not available.
Yeah. So there's two statements that are evaluated there.
Okay, so the next thing is, so now we have a vehicle that's available. And now we want to actually create a trip.
And so as Sean is doing this, you'll notice that he uses run and debug a lot, and he goes back and forth to the database. And this is what's going to happen with you as well as you're creating your application. You don't basically build out your entire function stack and execute it immediately. You want to basically go step by step and use the run and debug tool to make sure that things are working as you move forward. So that's kind of what Sean is doing as he starts to build this out.
Okay, so we need a start and a stop. Actually, the No, that makes sense. We want to start and stop.
So this would be the trip origin and the trip end, right?
Yeah.
The destination, right?
Okay, so we then map this, start and stop. Oops.
So what he's doing here is he's using the function add record. It's one of our database functions in Xano. And then he's filling out all of the different inputs. And so he's taking the start and the stop from the user input, and he's making sure that that gets populated in the trip table once this is executed.
Okay. So what we're doing here, we're getting the vehicle, making sure it's in the right state. We're then adding a trip, which is referencing the vehicle and the start and stop. And then we're also updating the vehicle to be busy. All right, so let's go back here just so I can get that point. So we will do, to make things easy, we'll just do a trip with the same start and stop. Oops, there we go. Okay, so vehicle one, that's the Mazda. We've got our stop, and we have our start and stop. All right, so let's do run and debug. Okay, so what this means, so that returned the vehicle. There's other stuff going on here, like the trip. But if we come back here, so vehicle, if I click on this, the state should be changed to busy. Perfect, that's good. We should have a trip entry. So we're saying Sean, well, I authenticated as myself. I should have been done Prakash. Actually, let's do this again. So we'll go back to vehicle, we'll set it to available. And this time I'll authenticate with Prakash. There we go. Okay, and I can use the same points. We'll come back here. Now the trip should be Prakash, booked the Mazda 3. It just got requested, and it's got the start and stop. So I think that is the first step. So now we need, the next API is, so now that it's been booked, is to say that the trip has started. Start trip. Okay, so this would be a reference to the trip ID. We're going to get the trip. We're then going to, once the trip, we want to do a precondition. So we'll just make sure that that exists.
And just as he's writing out this precondition, you're going to notice on the API endpoint for booking the trip and also for starting the trip, he's using a post, which basically it tells the API that we're basically writing to this API endpoint. On the get available cars, he used the get. So that's typically what you use to just get information. That doesn't mean that you can't execute things that write to the database in a get command, but typically best practice is this is how you would do it.
Okay, so we have trip one, precondition failed. Oh, that's because it's trip two, that's why. All right, so that was a good example of the precondition actually doing the right thing. Okay, awesome. So we have a trip that's requested, but now I need to do something with it. So once we get the trip, we also can make our lives easier. Let's say I want a vehicle on that.
So Sean is using what's called an add-on right now. And an add-on, similar to GraphQL, enriches the response that you get in the same request. So you see like he's added on the details of the vehicle in that same request. So it's a very easy way to basically enrich the data that you are getting back.
Yeah, so and then we can add another precondition because I can only start the trip if I happen to be the driver. So here, I would want to see trip dot vehicle dot user ID. I think that's right. Is equal to the authenticated ID. Let's see if that's right. I think I might have a typo. Oh, that's what I do.
Yeah, so this is Sean now using the debugger. When you run in debug, there's a debug tab that allows you to basically go through how this query was executed and find out where it might be failing, which tends to happen a lot when you're building these unique endpoints. And Sean is doing definitely best practice around adding all of these preconditions to check that all of the states are nominal before he actually executes this trip.
Yeah, so here I just did, I picked myself, so that's supposed to work. If I picked Prakash, who is the customer, it should not work. So the precondition. So that just makes sure that only the driver of that vehicle is running this API, and otherwise it throws an error. Okay, so the next thing is now we need, so
only the driver can start the trip, is what you're saying. Yeah.
So now we're going to update the trip with the new state. I'm going to go with started. I think we can skip confirm. I mean, technically you can keep adding more states like, hey, I'm on my way. But since we're kind of like on a little bit of a crunch, we'll just go to start. Okay, so let's actually start this trip. Okay, let's go back to the database. This trip should now have a different state, started, awesome. And then the next thing is, so start and then stop. So we can actually make this real easy because we can just clone it. Okay, so it would be the same, almost the same thing. Instead of requested, it's started. All right, and then instead of edit, editing started, it is complete. Actually, we'll rename that to complete trip. Okay, awesome. So the next thing, actually, I just realized there's one other thing. So once the trip is complete, the vehicle needs to go back into available. So we will update, we've got, what is it? Trip one dot vehicle. And then we want to set available. Okay, awesome. So let's actually complete the trip. And again, I'm going to do Prakash here. So that should throw an error. Okay. I'm going to switch it over to Sean. And this should work. Did not work. Let's see what happened. Oh, I did the same mistake with the wrong trip ID. There we go. Trip 2. Okay, awesome. So we're going to check two things. First, we go on the trip, and the state should be complete now. Perfect. All right. Then we go to the vehicle, and it should be available. Awesome. Okay, so I think there's one more thing that would be nice to have, and it would be Um,
Bless you.
let's do two things. We'll do my trips, I guess, yeah, my customer trips and my vehicle trips. So depending on the driver or customer. So we'll do my customer trips. All right, we'll do query all records, trip, and then, oops, we want to do a custom query. So customer is equal to authenticated ID.
So this is a customer that has logged in and wants to see all of their trips, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, it's probably because I had the wrong. So Prakash.
Yeah, I'm the customer.
There you go. Awesome.
Okay, I have one trip.
And then we can do the add-on again. And since we already created it, it should be right there. So it's super quick. We'll rerun it. Okay, awesome. So then we can clone this to be my vehicle or driver trips. And then what we need to do is change, instead of customer ID. Okay, so actually this gets a tiny bit trickier because the driver ID is available through the vehicle. So we have to do a join. So we'll do trip.vehicle ID is equal to vehicle ID, basically just mapping IDs.
So just before we move forward, because I know this is going to trip some people up, talk a little bit about high level, the inner join, and why you needed to do it in order to get the driver.
Yeah, so what we're trying to do here is show just how you saw on the previous screen, where it was a list of the trips that the customer took. That was really easy because the customer ID was right there, right? But to then do the alternative perspective, where it's I want to see trips that the driver took, the driver ID is not there, but it is available through the vehicle. So we basically need to we need to join those two tables, technically like putting them right next to each other so that we could get access to this user ID, right? That's all it is. So if you don't immediately have it accessible, you make it accessible by bringing in the other table so you can reference it. So I just realized I think I forgot to hit save on that one.
Yeah. So just as you're recreating this, again, as Sean was mentioning, a vehicle belongs to a driver, but it may not necessarily be immediately available based on the type of API you're running. So you make it available through an inner join. And that's kind of what Sean is doing here in this step.
Exactly. All right. So now that first we do the join, then we make it so that the appropriate vehicle lines up. So we're doing, I want the vehicle database table lined up to the trip based on the vehicle ID. If we didn't do that, it would then be out of order and you may have someone else's car. So this just makes sure that the right car is there for the right trip. So now that we've done that, we then can now update this. Instead of customer ID, we can reference vehicle.user ID is equal to auth ID.
And that shows up because of the join. As soon as you join something, it's accessible to you in your little input selector, and then you can do the query just like Sean did.
Yeah. Okay, so now we'll do run and debug. We'll do...
You're the driver, right?
Yeah, we'll do Prakash on purpose, so this should return nothing. And then we'll do, because he's the customer, if we do Sean, then we should get the list. There we go. Awesome. So yeah, that's kind of the gist. I mean, we're definitely oversimplifying it. There's still a lot of things can go wrong driving a car, and there can be issues. So there's still more robust stuff to handle or to flesh out when things don't go perfectly. But at the end of the day, it's really just kind of adding a couple more endpoints here, and then we would be integrating the third parties to make sure that, like right now, I just booked a trip. Technically, it was for free, right? We want to actually charge, so that'd be a separate thing.
Yeah, this was great. And so, just a couple high level questions here. If you go to your database, why did you decide to have just a single user table that encompass the demand side and the supply side rather than separating out as two different tables?
Yeah, good question. So the nice thing about this is technically a driver could be a customer, right? That actually, just because you're an Uber driver doesn't mean you're forbidden from ever enjoying the perks of having someone else drive you around. So by having the same user table, it allows you to take on different roles. And that's why we have that roles, the list of roles. So if you did keep it separate, it still is technically possible that you could make it so you could be you could play both sides, but you'd have to duplicate the data, which kind of gets annoying. Anytime you duplicate data, you then run the risk of having it get out of sync, and really you kind of just want to avoid all these unnecessary complications, and it just makes things a whole lot nicer just having one single table for anyone who's accessing the site, regardless of perspective.
Yes. And how about I noticed that you have four distinct tables here. Do you have a method or a way you think about which objects should be their own separate tables versus properties within an existing table?
Yeah. So I'm also realizing, yeah, we didn't really use transaction. Transaction really would come in handy when we really did, because right now technically all the trips are free. It's a little bit of overkill. But when we do start linking in Stripe, and also realizing that payments technically, just as trips can go wrong, payments can also go wrong. So you kind of got to manage state when potentially maybe something charged and then there was a chargeback, like handling all those different cases. So I know this really wasn't used today, but when we really link in the Stripe support, that would be more important in there. But in terms of why use different tables versus referencing them. So, well, a good example is the roles, right? Technically, I could have created a roles table, and which would just have been a single role. So right now we have a list of roles. So if you had another table, it'd be a single role and then a reference to the user. We could have done that. That's definitely way heavier. Like I think everyone can agree, updating a role by clicking and going in there, I mean, that's pretty nice, right? And you have all your data localized. Like I know I'm looking at Prakash's record right here. It's very easy to tell. Whereas if it was another table, you kind of lose that. For this specific view, you would then need to, I mean, whatever your administration panel is, would have to make it so that you could tell what records were related to another. So sometimes it's easier to just keep things, it's called having the data localized. So it's just convenient having the data right there. Does that apply to everything? No, it does not. So basically anytime it's a small amount, like we're not having 1,000 roles for Prakash. Like it might be, like currently it's possible to have 2 at the most, right? So that's a perfect candidate for having just the array as part of the table. If this was bigger, like for example, the trips, like what happens if I do a trip every day? So after a year, we've got 365 trips. And after 10 years, 3,000 plus trips, right? So that definitely feels way too big to be put in an array, even though it'd be easy to edit it, it would kind of, you would kind of outgrow it just because there's just too much data. So that's a perfect example of why you would want the trip in a separate table. And also one more thing to keep in mind, anytime you make an update here, it's updating the entire row. So if we had, let's say that 10-year example, if we had 10 years of trips all in that row, and I wanted to make a new trip, it means we'd be resaving all 3,000 plus trips just to add another trip, right? And that obviously seems like overkill. So yeah, again, really, there's kind of like this gauge of how many records are there going to be. In the roles case, it's maximum 2. In the trips case, it could be thousands. And then how often is it going to be updating? And like roles don't change that much. Once you're a driver, you're pretty much a driver, right? Yeah, so hopefully that made sense.
Yeah, definitely makes sense. And this kind of gets into the power of Xano, allowing you to do relational and non-relational type layouts and views. As Sean is mentioning, if you have a large data set like the trips table and you're going to get into thousands of rows, Xano allows you to create a separate table and then just do a simple table reference. But if you want data localized, just like this, like roles is maybe never going to get more than 5, then you would do that here. And I've heard a good rule of thumb is once you start approaching, like around 100 things in your list, like in your roles table, that's when you are going to want to start thinking about separating it out into another table altogether. So this was a really great overview. Once again, Sean, if you could just go over to the API, we'll just talk kind of at a high level, just wrapping it up about the different endpoints that were created. So first and foremost, you kind of have the top 2 that we're seeing, the ability to book the vehicle and complete the trip. So click on book the vehicle very, very quickly. So as you can see, it took 3 inputs from the user. First of all, which vehicle was being used, the beginning of where the user was, the origin, and then finally the destination. And then at the function stack, this again is the power of where Xano really excels. It can do multiple things, can go through multiple preconditions to really make sure the environment is right to execute it. So in this case, it gets the record based on what the user has entered. It makes sure that the vehicle actually, number 1, exists and it's available. And if all of those things pass, then it's going to start the trip, right? And it's going to change the vehicle state to it's being occupied. So you can see anytime you're building an application, your application is unique. It has these nuances, and the function stack allows you to kind of define all of those things. And so Sean created a number of different endpoints. I encourage you to watch it back again. Sean, one more thing, go back to the database table here, or just go back to the database. We use the example of Uber, but this would apply for another 2-sided marketplace. So for example, if you were doing something like an Airbnb, your user might be it'd be a combination of your hosts and also your guests. That would be the user table, and the different roles might be a guest versus a host. That's what you would define there. And then instead of a vehicle, it would be a place to stay or a location where you would stay. So you can see how this maps to these different 2-sided marketplace concepts. Sean just kind of showed you how they all link together. As I mentioned, we're not going to go over the third-party integrations because it would just basically go over time. There's just too much to cover there. But again, we offer weekly office hours twice a week where we're happy to help you build. So we hope that you find this helpful, or you found this helpful. And please just let us know in the comments below whether you have any questions, any clarifications, or any future type of MVB videos that you would like to see us do. So thank you so much for your time, and we'll see you on the next one.
Thanks, guys.